the culture and kind of fabric and personality of an agency often flows or stems directly from the owner. And, you know the old saying, a fish rots from the head down, right? If you don't like what you see with the ownership group, or there's red flags from them, then oftentimes you're going to see some of the same red flags in the actual experience of engaging with them. And of course, the inverse is true. I think if you see footage or hear content or audio of someone that you find to be inspiring or very thoughtful, very intentional in the advice they give and the words they use, I think that too also becomes something that you can more or less expect to get from the staff and experience of hiring that agency.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, we're going to have a great conversation today because I think a lot of organizations are stuck for numerous reasons. And when you start thinking about the complexity in regards to lead generation, brand building, digital selling, digital marketing, I mean, the complexity is continuing to grow at an ever increasing rate. And guess what? It ain't going to go back to the bell-bottom days. It's just not going to happen. And John Bertino's on the show with us, is going to help us with that. John, thanks a lot.
Yeah, pleased to be here, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so before we get into our discussion, and we're going to talk about how not to get burned hiring the wrong marketing agency, and you're going to give us some insights on oftentimes what you see organizations do when they are hiring the incorrect agency. But before we go into that, please tell us a little bit about your background and your experience and what you're going to bring to the table today.
All right, sure. So personally, just briefly, I came from pretty humble beginnings and kind of scrapped my way into eventually launching TAG, or the Agency Guide, 8 years ago. From an educational perspective, growing up in the South Jersey, Philadelphia region, I'm a Rutgers University graduate with a major in marketing, minor in business administration. I started out, my career had a few initial, kind of inconsequential jobs that came right out of college, but I pretty early found my way into marketing, where I was working for a lot of different marketing agencies. And then through that journey, it was really interesting to kind of see the way different marketing agencies were structured, the way they approached their growth and scale, the way they approached dealing with clients, which is a major consideration for an agency. Whether you want to have a package solution, customized solution, whether you want to be sales focused versus, more custom oriented in the way you approach things. And seeing that range and mix of different agencies was the perfect kind of background and primer for what I eventually do today, which is essentially matchmaking brands with different marketing agencies.
Well, okay, so I think that for those who are not familiar with what you're doing, and whether it's in this world or maybe even a different iteration, when you say matchmaking, there's a lot more to it than that. And that's why we're going to have our discussion today, because you're actually getting the opportunity to meet with organizations that have some, for them, very serious problems for them to solve. And especially when you start talking about, in today's world, where the explosion, associated with, digital.
That's right.
I mean, even when you start even thinking about the fraud related issues associated with digital, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And when you don't have the experience, or there was a research study that was talked about unskilled and unaware. And it's a really important piece for a lot of us to really understand. And I mean, basically what it is that when we don't understand something, we can't evaluate it very well. Right.
Yeah.
And here's the funny thing too, is that when it comes to that gap associated with being unskilled and unaware, men are significantly worse at it. We think we know something and we don't know squat.
Say it ain't so, Jim. Say it ain't so.
Hey, I mean, I have to wear the label, right? And so that's kind of where we have to be humble. But you see, there's more things, but we're going to today talk about 5 things that you often see organizations that are, seeking to solve these problems through an agency are oftentimes stumbling, over, which is causing them to hire the wrong agency. So the first thing you talked about is that, and I see this a lot myself, is, hey, I needed this fixed, last year, last month, last week, and they say I'm too busy. So if you could explain that a little bit and the chaos that's associated with that, and then therefore the causes that it creates.
Yeah, sure thing. You're spot on, and you really alluded to it. First of all, the problem with the marketing agency landscape is, let's be honest, there's low barriers to entry. In addition to that, it's a pretty sexy lifestyle type business, or at least it can be, for those that want to do things virtually and remote from a laptop. The combination of not needing necessarily a lot of formal training to call yourself a marketing expert, coupled with the allure of the lifestyle business, the result is we've got all kinds of marketing agencies, air quotes, springing up left and right. A lot of these teams are pretty unqualified, and it's very easy, or fairly easy anyway, to look pretty good, right? Through the Wixes and Squarespaces and whatnot of the world, the templates that are available. It's not too hard to throw up a website and look good. And that creates an extremely cluttered and crowded and confusing landscape for companies looking to hire reliable talent. And then, to your point, then when you've got a CMO or an owner or whoever it is that needs to go out and find this agency, oftentimes they're too busy to really give it the time, care, and attention it deserves. And so obviously, that's a dangerous formula between the unqualified service providers and the buyer that's extremely, extremely busy. And, you touched on it exactly, that, unless that buyer has a background in marketing, the other element to this is just kind of assuming that they know what's best for them, or maybe not taking the proper time to do the research to really understand what is or isn't best for them. And then to kind of bring it full circle, another one of the problems with just the agency sourcing process in general is that agencies have a natural tendency or proclivity to recommend you solve your marketing challenges with what it is that they do best. And kind of hard to blame them, right? Because if you're a brand marketer, you're going to have a natural tendency to try to recommend brand to solve, all things or most things or too many things. If you're an SEO expert on the other end of the equation, you're going to have that natural tendency to try to solve a lot of problems with organic search. And in truth, all marketing channels have their merits, their pros and cons. And, that's why, our approach as an intermediary that match makes brands with agencies allows us to be incredibly objective, and objectivity, I think, is a big part of our secret sauce.
As you're talking, I even start thinking about a conversation I even had this week when the word that I would like to use in that example that you were talking about as alignment is, okay, so this is, and I always talk about working backwards. I talk about retrospective engineering. So it's like, what's our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? What is the problem we want to solve for? And then once that is clearly identified, we start working backwards to say, okay, what do we need to do in order to get to the point right before that? And then you just keep working on backwards, because then you'll start getting a better chance of being aligned. Because, like for me, I work in the B2B space, and a lot of times I'll have organizations that are trying to do transactional related marketing activities for something that's a very complex, high touch, high relationship sell.
Speak my language, Jim.
And I'm like, what are you doing? Going out and purchasing a whole slew of Google ads and shooting people to a landing page and say, hey, come check out our sexy demo is not going to work for you. Right?
Bingo.
Why are you doing that? Right. And because this is what we were told we were supposed to do, or this is what, my competition is doing. Well, go ahead. Let them piss away the money. You don't do that. And having that alignment discussion, and then, like I said, too, men, they'll sit there and say, oh, this is what I want. Well, then we're not a right fit. And I think for you, in our discussion prior to recordings, fit became a very important element in regards to success, because if we don't do the due diligence, and I don't want to make due diligence seem like it's something of dredge and pain,
but it doesn't have to be that laborious.
It does not. And so you talked about, like, for example, and this seems pretty darn simple, but when you said it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so vital, is that I want to meet who my account manager is going to be. Who's the person who I'm going to be interacting on, at least a weekly basis, to make sure that we're jointly finding success. Tell us a little bit why that's so important.
Yeah, sure. So, most businesses, and I'll certainly circle back to your question, they're going to go through the standard checkpoints of looking at the website. Let me see your case studies. Can I check out some references? All of those things are great. But at the end of the day, a lot of the experience that brand or company is going to have with that agency, with that engagement is really going to feel with, 75, 80% of it comes back to the individual or individuals they'll be working with on a daily basis. And so oftentimes, not always, the person you deal with during the sales cycle isn't at all the person that's actually going to be working on your account. And so it's such a simple recommendation, right? But the ability to meet and get a little time to get to know your prospective account manager or managers before you sign on that dotted line and cut that first check is a really easy but critical thing you can do to ensure your chances of success with the marketing agency you hire.
It's funny that you say that. So one of the things that I do, you and I talked about this, but I focus in on B2B lead gen primarily. And influence, the brand side, which a lot of organizations, I think, like you're saying, are trying to solve lead gen problems with brand solutions. That's a problem. But anyway, I give a guarantee. I give a 30-day guarantee. They're like, well, are you going to see results that you're, like these other companies, have received in 30 days? I said, well, no, because some of these things are long-term in nature, and we have to start putting the elements in place, and these are systems that we have to apply and all of that.
That's right.
And I said, but here's what you will know. You will know once we start getting into this, whether this is junk. I said, but obviously we've proven these things can work. But the other thing is, you're going to sit there and say, there's no way I could work with Jim. He can drive me nuts.
That's right. You get a feel for each other. You date before the long-term commitment, right?
Right. And here's what I also say is, I might say the same about you.
Oh, for sure. If we're talking about what's going to help an agency be successful, right? You want to screen and be particular about who you want as a client, and not to get off on a long tangent about agency success. But boy, I think one of the worst things an agency can do is be too receptive to take any client they can get. And we're not just talking about money here. We're talking about personality, industry, scope of work. So it works both ways.
It absolutely does. And I think we've kind of lost that thinking in our digital age. But I don't think that's ever going to change. And I think the companies who are getting that right are the ones really who are going to thrive in the long run. Those are be the ones who are going to disrupt and acquire instead of being disrupted and be acquired.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agree.
Okay. So then when you start talking about this whole culture piece and this whole fit piece, you talk about, depending on the agency and the size of the agency and what they're doing, what you're looking for them for, you may be a couple levels removed from the person who was responsible for the founding of the organization. Hopefully they're still there. And if they're not, that's yet a different way that you have to do some, research and due diligence. But you want to know who that person is, because that personality, I think you had said, kind of resonates throughout their entire culture. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, 100%. I think from most agencies are typically founder led, unless they get gobbled up by one of the big guys. And in which case, probably the vast majority of your listeners aren't necessarily looking to work with Publicis or what have you. And so, it shouldn't be too hard to get a feel for the original founder. And so while it may be unrealistic to ask to speak directly to the owner or founder, although it really shouldn't be, but while it might be a bit much to ask to get that guy on the phone for a powwow, usually you can definitely find out, you can definitely get audio or video of that agency owner or some of the founding stakeholders easily through YouTube or anything else. In other words, another key recommendation other than just meeting the account manager is try to get a feel for ownership, because I find that, as a guy that represents roughly 200 different agencies, a trend I've certainly seen in over 8 years of doing this is that the culture and kind of fabric and personality of an agency often flows or stems directly from the owner. And, the old saying, a fish rots from the head down, right? If you don't like what you see with the ownership group, or there's red flags from them, then oftentimes you're going to see some of the same red flags in the actual experience of engaging with them. And of course, the inverse is true. I think if you see footage or hear content or audio of someone that you find to be inspiring or very thoughtful, very intentional in the advice they give and the words they use, I think that too also becomes something that you can more or less expect to get from the staff and experience of hiring that agency.
I think, the whole humanity of business is something that, I think it needs
underrated,
to be top.
Jim.
It's very underrated. And I think it needs to be, talking about always on top. Because one of the things for me that I value the most is when a client can say back to me, I trust you. I mean, that's gold, man. That's platinum. That's precious right there.
Well, 100%. Another element I think that often leads to client agency success, I often say, is to allow yourself to be coachable. And it's one of those things where people go, oh, yeah. I'm coachable, or, I'm a good listener. But no, really, I mean, if you're hiring a third party to do something because your organization is weak in that area, there needs to be some level, if not a lot, of being able to kind of let your guard down a bit, take the advice from the people that are doing it every day, and allow yourself to learn and be coachable and not too prideful. Probably who struggles with this the most, honestly, is CMOs. The owners often are more willing to, if they're not a marketer by trade or it's not their forte, oftentimes they're not always. It's easier for them to let go, or, junior entry, mid-level talent, they understand when they're dealing with someone that might have more experience or a lot more experience than them in a certain marketing channel. But it's the CMOs or director level marketers, I find, that can put up a wall because they don't want to expose, where they might have a lack of understanding. And it's a simple thing that I promise you ruins a lot of these engagements, these client agency engagements. So another great point.
Well, as you were saying that, I started thinking about the data that I was looking at recently that talked about the tenure of CMOs is like under 2.5 years. I'm like, sounds like a contributing factor.
Right. No doubt. Being coachable and open to the perspective of people that are doing, working these channels in the trenches every day. It sounds obvious, but it's key.
Well, also too, I think when you start looking at just the way the evolution and rapid pace of change, I don't, for me, it used to be a badge of honor, maybe even a potential trust builder to say that, well, heck, I've been doing this for the past 25 years.
Careful, Jim.
Yeah. But it's
Right.
like, okay, but what have you learned in the past 5 days?
Yep.
Because that pace of change, I don't see it changing. It used to be where, it was simple in regards to do some of the things that we know would have to now take place in regards to having an organization, market. I don't even want to say digital anymore, just market, and then actually generate leads and to make sales. And the complexity is just ever increasing. But we go back to kind of how we started, that foundational piece. One of the things that you had mentioned is, researching, that person who actually founded the organization. But then to take it a little bit further, to get underneath it, you talk about the origin story of the organization. What do you mean by that?
Sure, absolutely. So, we talk about some of the flaws or things that agencies are doing wrong and what makes it hard to source a good one. And among those flaws is this propensity to tout yourself as full service. And, just in general, I'm a firm believer in agencies, especially ones that are, under 5 years old, to be not just niche, but very niche in what they do and what they offer. And so when you're on the other side of the equation, when you're the buyer and you're talking to these agencies, they again have this tendency to say, oh, well, we're full service, or we're omni-channel, or we do it soup to nuts. And a lot of what that's rooted in is not wanting to scare anyone away with their potential lack of experience in a certain area. Or it's this type of thing where if we can't do it, we have partners that do it. And sometimes we expose those partners transparently. Oftentimes we keep them behind the scenes and then just bill for the service when really it's a third party doing it. And so what I've found is when you're getting this, we're full service thing thrown at you, ask them about their origin story. Okay, you're full service. Well, where did you start? And so let's take, for example, if you're trying to hire someone for social media ads. Well, in today's social media environment, the ad creative is critical to the success of that ad campaign. And so if you dig into an agency's origin story and you find that, really our roots are in SEO and PPC ads, it's not nearly as much of an easy segue into social ads as they would have you think it to be or understand it to be. A lot of agencies did that natural progression. Oh, we offer Google search ads. Well, now we're doing social too. But over the years, again, that creative component has been what separates the wheat from the chaff, the men from the boys, the strong from the weak. It's that ability to create great creative. And so ironically, I find that a lot of agencies that are best at social ads have deep roots in creative. They were a creative agency, a design agency, a branding agency, they have strong video roots. They know all about creating compelling content. Just to invert that and put it on its head and show you the other side of it. Conversely, if you've got an agency that's roots are, let's say it is in creative, we had a branding agency and then we moved into, doing a lot of social content but you're looking for SEO and they're like, oh yeah, we do that too. A bit of a red flag. I mean, unless you really dig into that and you ask to speak to that SEO strategist on their team or whatever it is, it's hard for an agency to move from creative first, creative focused into being a great technical SEO agency or even a great Google advertising management agency. And I could give you a million other examples of this. But again, the point is digging into an agency's origin story will tell you a lot about kind of how they came up in marketing, what probably they saw as important and foundational to marketing success, and can tell you a lot about who they really are as an organization today.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking about, okay, these are, barriers and issues that are generated when an organization is actually trying to hire, the right marketing agency. So I don't want to get burned hiring the wrong marketing agency. Right. That's my objective. And I'm sitting here and I want to think about what is kind of like that ideal pathway and also a timeline. Right. So what should I expect? What expectations should I create for myself to say, okay, I want to find the right one. How long is this going to take? And how do I actually need to segment this timeline? You're muted, John.
Oh, not sure what caused that. Sorry. The typical timeline with hiring an agency, a good one, let's say to interview 2 to 4 agencies is usually, ironically, about 2 to 4 months. Because you're going to have your preliminary phone call or two to get to know them, have them get to know you, what your needs are, so on and so forth. And then, of course, if they're, it depends on the service. It depends on how big of a scope of work this is. But assuming assuming it's not devising a marketing plan for a brand new startup with no budget, assuming there's some meat on the bone and there's a fair amount of substance to the engagement, I think for an agency to put together a really thoughtful scope of work and probably do a little digging into analytics or something like this, or your ad campaigns, for example, it's usually going to take them a solid week, plus or minus a day or two, to put together a really good proposal for you. Then, you got to get on the phone, review it together, take some time to chew on it. And then you're going to talk to 2 or 3 other agencies, right? So I'd say that process in general, again, about 2 to 4 months to do it right. And of course, if the engagement's much longer than that, or much larger than that, it can certainly take a little bit longer.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking about a couple of different things. And I had a discussion with an organization not to be named a couple of days ago. And what they were doing was coming into organizations, and primarily they were focusing in on ones that had just received, say, a Series A round of funding. And they were coming in and essentially saying, okay, we are going to implement basically marketing and sales operations systems and do it pro bono. And then what they're going to do is they're going to take a revenue share from you, and then also build it into an equity stake. And so they'll bring everything. They'll bring all the experts, from the, on the digital marketing side, digital selling side, and put all this in place. Are you seeing an appetite for organizations on two fronts? One's to say, okay, well, if you're a good marketing agency, what about doing a rev share model? Or a marketing agency saying, hey, we're going to perform so well for you. Would you be open and interested into a rev share model? So in other words, we'll charge you at cost, and then we're going to take a percentage of sales. I mean, are you seeing more of these hybrid type models start to spring up, or not so much?
So short answer is not so much, but there's no shortage of appetite from the brand side for an agency willing to work more performance-based. And so if you are an agency out there that's open to this type of thing, I'd be curious to get to know you. And this has been coming up through my entire career, from when I was just, the entry-level guy answering the phones, all the way up till now when I'm talking with brands of all sizes, this idea of, well, what about something more performance-based? And the common challenges that arise from this are a few things. First of all, the agencies that, generally speaking, are doing the most business and kicking the most ass, Jim, can I say that? Are those that they're not especially hungry, and they're not necessarily looking to get creative and fancy with, how they structure their engagement with you, because you're not sure if you trust or believe in them. And again, I think it's reasonable from the buyer side to have this perspective, to desire that, but just keep in mind that more often than not, you're probably going to be needing to deal with an agency or consultant that's hungrier in order to actually get that type of engagement. The next thing that's come up a couple of times on this, again, this is actually a very familiar conversation with me, is this idea of the agency. I think for this really to work, they need to be really bought in, right? They need to be either bought in so much so to your product or service, or really just into the potential that they see, the lack of competition, whatever it is. And in order for that agency to be bought in enough that they're willing to take, a hit on the short-term revenue, requires extra kind of diligence, research on their part to see if they are bought in, to see if they really do believe, because, it's almost like being part owner. I mean, it's not being part owner, but you're putting your time and resources on the line as the agency to offer that performance-based engagement. And so again, you get back to, a lot of the agencies just don't want to put the time, effort, and energy into seeing if they're that much of a believer, especially if they have other clients lining up. And then last but not least, and I'll be concise on this point, is the legal. So again, if you're the agency and you're like, okay, well, you know what? I think I'm interested in this. I think I am really bought in. I think there is really high potential here. I think you'd be wise to have quite a bit of legal sussed out around it, because what you don't want to do is put all this sweat equity in up front only to get burned on the back end. And so once again, it just becomes one of these, is it worth the trouble, or should I just pass on this opportunity and get to the next guy that's going to pay me regularly?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And once you said that, I probably important for me to state that company that I was referring to, they're actually a VC fund.
Right.
And what they have done is they've essentially kind of controlled, their investment to some degree, because they're vetting these companies that they're taking on as clients, like you're saying.
Right.
They're finding fit, they're finding opportunity, they're doing all this due diligence work before they get to that
industry.
Yep,
yeah, that's
absolutely.
right. So you can, yeah, exactly. So VC fund is really well equipped to, address some of those key variables I just rattled off. That's right.
That's right. And from a venture capitalist perspective, I think it's kind of brilliant.
I would absolutely agree.
Okay. So, all right. Now I'm sitting here and we talked about things that we need to avoid. We talked about a process that we can go through in order to be able to find success. so that I actually don't hire that wrong marketing agency. I'm hiring the right marketing agency. And when you kind of talked about the timeline a little bit, but I think one of the things that you had mentioned at the very beginning is what I often find happens time and time again. And I even had a good friend of mine who was a technology consulting firm, and she, like kind of like what you were talking about, is more on the buyer advocacy side, vendor neutral. Will help them to make the right answer, or get the right answers and make the right solution purchases and all that stuff. But this is what she said. She says about 95% of the organizations that come to me, I tell them I can't help them, and this is why. Because they come to me and they say, we're in dire straits. We need to have something to solve this problem immediately. And she flat out will say, I can't help you.
And that's because she doesn't like to rush through the process.
It's kind of like what you were talking about, the whole too busy piece. They're unskilled and unaware. There's all these elements and factors that come into play. And she just says, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You should, unfortunately, especially when you start talking about tech implementation and transformation and all that type of, you're talking about a very, very big undertaking that takes a long time. So how can an organization prevent themselves from waiting too late?
Yeah, sure. Well, so the first thing I'll say is that when the buyer is in a rush, that can definitely be a bit of a red flag for all parties, right? We're talking about a fairly expensive purchase here, most likely. And, you never want to rush through a fairly expensive purchase, of course. Having said that, when it does come to, when there is a time sensitive component to this, and it's hard to, and I guess on the buyer side, you're really feeling as though you don't have time to do this right. That's certainly a perfect use case for what it is we're built to do, to sort through the different marketing channels, kind of advise for or against the way you're looking at a certain project. Again, we're super objective with the way we approach things. So helping them think through putting dollars in the right places to begin with, and then making that process of finding the right partner or getting some good candidates in front of them quickly. It's precisely what we're built to do. In terms of the brands themselves, just not finding themselves in that position to begin with, well, it's probably really a matter of planning. Trying to get ahead of things, understanding, as you poignantly pointed out earlier, there's a fairly considerate timeline associated with this process to do it right. And so I think planning ahead is really just the key.
Well, John, a whole lot of things for us to think about and realizations to come through, and for us guys, make sure that we can actually be a little bit more humble and understand that, when it comes to today's digital marketing in the business to business world, we're probably a lot more unskilled than we may suspect.
It's true. Again, that humility associated with the whole process, I think, is really key. And in any area, whenever sales is involved, forget marketing for a second. I think the tendency often from the buyer side is to put up a bit of a wall. But for something that's as complex as sourcing for marketing, I think if you hold too many cards tight to the vest and you're not willing to talk a little bit more about the situation internally, your strengths and weaknesses, where you're coming from, where you really need help, then it's going to be hard to actually identify the right partner to your organization. So there should be I really do recommend a degree of vulnerability as you go through the process. Otherwise, again, it's going to be hard for an agency to best meet your needs.
John Bertino, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. How does the B2B DM listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. And we love B2B. That's actually my professional background. I teach on inbound and digital marketing strategy, specifically for B2B at Drexel University in Philly. The best way to get back to me would be, well, first you can go to our website, www.theagencyguide.com, or email me, john@theagencyguide.com. On social, Agency Guide HQ across most social media channels.
John Bertino, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today, and we wish you the very best.
Love to be here, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.